So now you have some understanding of heritage impact assessment principles and process. But at the same time, the reality is that you can only undertake the impact assessment within the scope of your existing national laws and regulations and system. And we know in many cases that doing an impact assessment is quite difficult and there's a lot of challenges. And in some cases, the impact assessment is not done as well as it could be. Yesterday, someone asked the question, what do you do with a fake impact assessment to Julie? No? So it means that there is the possibility that the impact assessment is not done in a very rigorous manner. And so we do see in some cases that impact assessments can fail. And in some cases, impact assessments like EIAs become a tool for justifying a project instead of a tool for planning the project in a sustainable development kind of context. And so the EIA just becomes a checkbox that you have to check in order to proceed to the next step of your project planning and approval. And of course, from a heritage protection point of view, this is not what we want to see happen. And so when we look at impact assessment systems, there are very many dimensions in terms of determining if the system is strong or if the system is weak. And so Christopher Wood came up with a quite comprehensive framework that looks at all of the various issues in assessing whether an impact assessment system is strong or weak, starting first with legal issues, but also what is the content of the EIA that is required, what are the decision-making processes that are involved, and then finally, how is the monitoring carried out? So taking inspiration from this, but in the interest of limited time, I just want to look at a few issues regarding an enabling environment for heritage impact assessment, or EIAs. And so in blue, there are a number of issues related to legislation, regulations, and planning procedures. So if you don't have the law in place, then of course it's very difficult to carry out a HIA. And this is what our colleague from Cambodia was saying yesterday, no? Secondly, in yellow, when you actually want to do the heritage impact assessment, do you have the people to do it? Is there a review mechanism that is transparent and robust? Are there mechanisms to enforce the mitigation measures and to continue to monitor the impacts? Are there procedures in place for meaningful public consultation? And then finally, there are other issues related to coordination, to public awareness, and also to the reality of political pressures, which often are rushing through projects and not paying much attention to heritage issues at all. And so that's sort of the reality in which that we live. And so I want to take just 5 particular issues today, and I've mapped them against the process of impact assessment that has been proposed several times now in our meeting, which is the World Heritage Impact Assessment process. So at the stage of screening and scoping, it's important that the legislation is in place. Once we get to the stage of conducting an impact assessment, we need to have the right personnel, we need to have the right review process. And then following that, then we have to be able to have the processes in place for enforcement and for monitoring impacts. And so this is just a snapshot really of all the issues that we really should have in place. So first, let me just start with the issue of heritage impact assessment. So in your country, you could ask yourself, is heritage impact assessment legally required? And we know in Thailand, it's not yet legally required. We know that in Cambodia, it's not yet legally required. If it's legally required, under what laws? When is a heritage impact assessment triggered? What is the scope of the law? Does it clearly explain what is the HIA process? What is the content of an HIA report? What are the requirements for participation? And then finally, does your law say clearly who is authorized to review the heritage impact assessment? And there are many models for this, because in different countries, of course, different legal systems exist. So in some countries, you might have a standalone heritage impact assessment law or decree. In some cases, the HIA requirement is embedded in existing environmental impact assessment laws. In other countries, HIA may be required under heritage laws. In other countries, it may be required under other laws, like urban planning laws. And then finally, it might be required under international treaties. And on this point, of course, once again, the World Heritage Operational Guidelines are very clear. In paragraph 118 bis, it says, states parties shall ensure that EIAs, HIAs, and or SEAs should be carried out before development projects and activities are planned within or around a World Heritage property. So once again, these words are very important to bear in mind, within a World Heritage property, but also around a World Heritage property. So your impact assessment does not stop at the border of your World Heritage site, no? But if we look at other laws, there's a variation, no? So this is a law from the Russian Federation, which was amended recently to specifically say that cultural heritage sites on a World Heritage list must have impact assessment if there are any new construction projects. And what's interesting in the Russian law is it says that once the impact assessment is done, not only should this report be sent to the Russian Ministry for Cultural Heritage, but it also should be sent to the World Heritage Committee and UNESCO for review before the work is completed. So this is a quite clear instance where the national law is tying in with the international law and is actually requiring some kind of review by UNESCO and the World Heritage Committee before the work can proceed. Now, if we come back closer to home, in the example of Lao PDR, the heritage law of Lao PDR has just recently been revised and literally was in the National Assembly just a few days ago for review. And in the revision of the law, the Lao authorities have added 2 new requirements for HIA that could impact cultural, historical, or natural heritage. And it also says that this HIA has to be approved by the Ministry of Information, Culture, and Tourism. At the same time in Lao, there is also the EIA Decree, which goes back to 2019. And in this decree, it already says that environmental impact includes impact on natural heritage and cultural heritage. And it also says that one of the grounds to reject a project, to reject the certificate of issuance of compliance, is if a project has significant impacts to heritage, historic and cultural areas as well. So we can see that the EIA in Lao, the EIA law is quite clear, but what is not clear is the mechanism in order to do it in Lao. And what it also remains to be done is to combine between the heritage law and the EIA law and to find the connection between these 2 laws in moving ahead with conducting HIAs in Lao. Now, if we come to Vietnam, the law on environmental protection in 2014 specifically says that acts that infringe upon natural heritage sites are prohibited. And it says that EIAs should be carried out for projects that are on land that is situated in national parks, including cultural monuments and World Heritage sites, as well as biosphere reserves. So we can see that the Vietnamese law regarding EIA is very clear about protecting not only World Heritage sites, but other cultural and natural heritage as well. Now, if we go to Cambodia, there is a draft law on EIA that was developed in 2015 that has subsequently been incorporated into the Environmental and Natural Resource Code. And in this law, it doesn't use the word heritage, but it uses the word culture. So it says that development projects must assess the impacts on environment, so that would include natural heritage, economy, society, health, and culture prior to approval, no? And it says that in fact, anyone who creates any kind of impacts and pollution and causes damage to environment, health, economy, and culture must be the one to bear the cost to repair this damage. So there's a responsibility to undertake the assessment, to avoid doing the project, but also to take responsibility for the cost. The EIA laws and the HIA laws are a little bit different, and it goes back to the nature of EIAs and HIAs, which are different, right? We know that in EIA laws, the trigger to do an EIA is based on the size of the project or the location of the project in sensitive areas or the expected magnitudes of the project. So in Lao, once again, If it's a smaller project with expected low impacts, then it would go through an IEE process that can be reviewed at the provincial level. But if it is a larger project with major impacts, then it has to go through a full EIA process. On the other hand, HIAs are different because the object of a heritage impact assessment is the heritage itself. So it doesn't matter whether the project is located inside a heritage site or next to a heritage site. It could be quite far away. And as we saw the example from Eugene Zhou from ICOMOS, projects that are transnational and in fact maybe located hundreds of kilometers away can still have an impact on your heritage site. And in that case, it's necessary to do a heritage impact assessment. And the ICOMOS guidelines, which is now about to be updated, also says that the important thing within these laws is that we have to have specific provisions for heritage impact assessment, even within EIA laws, because the approach is quite different. So while an EIA will look at separate cultural heritage attributes or separate natural heritage attributes and assess impact separately, when it comes to a HIA, we have to look at the site as a whole. It's not possible, for instance, at a World Heritage Site to say, I look at this monument and that's it, because somehow they're connected through the ancient urban planning, they're connected through the historic water system and so forth. And so we have to look at the whole heritage site in order to do a heritage impact assessment. And so these are differences that need to be clearly included in a law or in regulations that accompany a law, including the issue of the scope of the site as well, should be clearly stated so that it's not just that we're looking at potential problems when it's a project inside a World Heritage Site, but it could be located outside of the World Heritage Site as well. So I come now to the second question, which is the issue about capacity to conduct heritage impact assessments. So you can ask yourself these questions. In your country, are there people who are trained to conduct heritage impact assessment? Is there even a roster or a list of certified heritage impact assessment assessors? And if you have the people in place, do you have the financial resources to conduct the HIAs? Is there adequate baseline information and resources to conduct the HIAs? And so there are, again, various models, and Julie also shared this with us yesterday. One model could be that the government heritage department is the one who assesses the impacts. Another model is that external heritage experts are the ones who conduct HIAs in accordance with HIA guidelines. And in a very fully developed system, you might have to have certified HIA assessors conducting the HIAs. And for instance, in Myanmar, we've done quite a lot of training on heritage impact assessment over the years. And what the government Department of Archaeology has done is they've set up an HIA team. And wherever there is a project anywhere in the country, the Department of Archaeology will send the HIA team to go and assess the heritage impacts of that project. And then they provide a technical recommendation to the DOA, which then provides a technical recommendation to the relevant project owner, whether or not the project should go ahead or not in terms of its heritage impacts. So this is a kind of in-house system where the Fine Arts Department or Apsara or the Heritage Authority would be the ones to do the impact assessment yourself. On the other hand, in a fully developed system, you may need to actually put in place a system of training, registering and certifying impact assessors. And we know that these lists of rosters of certified impact assessment assessors exist because it's important to know that these people are qualified in order to do the work. And so in many countries, not anyone can do an EIA. You have to be on an official list of people who are certified and rostered to be able to do the EIA. And in the future, that might be the case for HIAs as well. Now I come to the third aspect, which is HIA review mechanism. So once you do the HIA, that's good. But now who is going to review it? And this is an issue that we're just discussing in Thailand because we've never done an HIA before. Who is going to review the HIA for UTIA? Which agency is authorized? Is the HIA review going to be part of an existing EIA process, or is it going to be independent? Are there clear criteria for reviewing the HIA? and to authorize or to reject the project. And then finally, you have to ask yourself, are the HIA reviewers well informed about heritage, or are they well informed about impact assessment issues? In some cases, we know that people who sit on these HIA panels or EIA panels may be experts in archaeology, but they may have no understanding of impact assessment. Or in some cases, they may be experts about impact assessment, but they have no basic understanding about archaeology. So that's why we have to have these committees. And we know in many countries that this review process is a two-step process. The first step is that the HIA or the EIA goes to a technical expert panel who provides its expert advice. And then it goes to the government agency that is authorized to review the EIAs, you know? And so in the case of Thailand, in fact, for special projects, it has to not only be reviewed by the government department, which is ONEP under the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, but special projects may require cabinet approval as well. So it has to go up to cabinet. And so the basic principle, of course, is that no projects should be authorized until the EIA is approved. And in some cases, if there are specific conditions regarding mitigation and monitoring and so forth, these should be tied to the authorization permit for the project as well. And so in Thailand, there are several committees of these expert review committees now, and they're divided by industrial sector. So we have one for mining, one for petroleum, one for water transport, one for dams and so forth, because of course the issues for each of these types of projects is quite different. And we see that in the approval process, the expert committee in pink does the preliminary review, and then it goes to ONEP for the final review before the license is granted. I would like to share with you a specific case, which is for health impact assessment. And this is interesting because this might be a good model for how you would build heritage impact assessment into an existing EIA process. So what's interesting here is that for health impact assessment, not only in Thailand, but in other countries as well, because the normal EIA body does not have expertise about health, it means that the health impact assessment has to be reviewed by an independent organization, and they have to make comments. And then once they do, then it goes back into the normal cycle where the environmental agency will review it. So this could be an interesting model that we could also adopt for heritage impact assessment, where this a separate review process for the heritage issue has to be done before the overall EIA will be reviewed and either rejected or approved. And so in this case, if there's a problem with the health aspect, it means that the whole EIA has to be reviewed again. And in the future, if there's a problem with the heritage review, it means that the whole EIA has to be reviewed again as well. And so I come now to the last issue, which is implementation, enforcement, and monitoring, which was reviewed yesterday as well. So how are mitigation measures implemented? How are they funded? Who enforces implementation? Who monitors impacts? And what is the mechanism for dealing with residual or cumulative impacts, especially if they surface or become apparent many years after the project is completed? And so this is a diagram which shows the EIA process in Lao PDR. And you'll notice that the first three steps are the steps that we have been talking about, no? Screening, scoping, and then the development of the EIA, as well as the kind of the management plan for the monitoring and impacts. What is notable is that these three steps are just the tip of the iceberg. There's so many other things that follow in actually implementing the recommendations from the HIA or the EIA and in following up. So we have to integrate the mitigation measures into design and procurement. We have to implement the monitoring, you know, as the construction work is going. We have to make sure that the monitoring and management plan is in place and is being complied with during the operation phase. And once we get to the decommissioning phase, we also have to ensure that those measures that were recommended are also applied even in the decommissioning phase. So you can see that it's a very long road ahead, no? And so what we're doing now is really just the first steps of the process. But once we go into design, pre-construction, construction, operation, and decommissioning, we have to continuously ensure that the impact assessment issues are dealt with all throughout, all the way down the road. No? And so these follow-up actions can be quite tricky. You know, in some cases, developers or operators have a limited time frame where they're contractually obligated to follow up and to undertake the mitigation measures. So these leave a number of questions that have to do with residual impacts, cumulative impacts, and impacts that happen all the way at the end of the lifespan of the project, which is decommissioning. And so here's an example from Hong Kong SAR, where we see that monitoring impact assessment compliance is very rigorously done. And they use a combination of means, no? So satellite photos, aerial photos, site inspections. If any of these initial sources of data show that there could be a potential violation, then a formal site inspection is carried out. And if in fact they find out that some of the requirements under the impact assessment mitigation recommendations have been breached, then this could lead to either a warning or it could lead to legal measures such as prosecution. So it's important to have the system in place, because otherwise the EIA or the HIA is just going to be a report that sits on a shelf somewhere, and it's never going to be implemented, and no one is ever going to be looking at the impacts that are happening from the project as the project enters construction and operation and decommissioning phase. And so with this, we've seen sort of an overview of some of the issues that you want to ask yourself as you go back to your own countries. Is my legal system robust enough? Does it include clear requirements for HIA? Are the regulations in place? Do I have people in place? Do I have funding in place? Who's going to review the HIA? Who's going to enforce the HIA? These are all questions you need to be asking yourself, because what we're seeing with the number of EIAs and HIAs that the World Heritage Committee is now requesting every country to do, it means that it is not possible to do this kind of impact assessment on an ad hoc basis. We cannot do a one-off study in Hinnamno, or a one-off study in Ayutthaya, or a one-off study in Chang'an. We have to have the system in place in order to ensure that these studies are part of a larger system of monitoring impacts on heritage, particularly World Heritage sites. And if that system is still not in place, or the system is still not clear, or the system is still not functioning, it means that it will be difficult to ensure that whatever HIA we start today is going to be meaningful down the road over the life of the project. And so if we summarize the difference between weak IA systems and more strong IA systems, we can see that impact assessment systems that are weak, it means that the legislation is weak or it's unclear. It may not require heritage issues to be addressed, even if the law is there, but maybe there's a lack of guidelines or detailed procedures. Maybe we don't have the money, we don't have the time, we don't have the people. Maybe there are economic and political pressures. And in some cases, in some countries, these economic and political pressures are actually built into the law. So it says, you have to do an EIA for all projects except projects that are done by the government. And this means that any government project doesn't have to do an EIA. This is already building in political pressure into your legal system. And as a result of all of these problems, we can see that in many countries, projects often start before receiving the proper impact assessment clearance. And we can see that even in our own World Heritage sites. And there also is a problem in terms of monitoring and enforcing. So that's sort of the bad news. This is what a weak impact assessment system looks like. So how do we try to build a strong impact assessment system? Well, first of all, we have to ensure that the funding and the time to do the impact assessment is available, and it has to be available in the system. No? So not just a constant negotiation to ask for more time and more funding, but it needs to be part of the legal and regulatory system. We have to have trained and certified heritage impact assessment practitioners. It really helps to have strong public awareness and participation, including strong civil society. In many cases, impact assessments are triggered because NGOs and other civil society groups are going to the press and going to the media and expressing concerns about these projects. It helps to have an overall socio-political context where environmental values and heritage values are integrated into public law and into decision-making. And then finally, it's good if our system requires a combination of upstream and downstream impact assessment tools. And we come back to strategic environmental assessments and heritage impact assessments, or EIAs. Ideally, in your national system, there should be requirements for when a strategic environmental assessment should be done. And that should be done at a quite early level, at the level of policies and plans and strategies, so that we don't come to the problem at the end of the road, which is the project. The project is being designed, or the project is now being constructed, and then we're desperately trying to do a heritage impact assessment when, in fact, it probably is too late, and many of those impacts are already unavoidable. And so this sort of gives you a bit of an overview of the overall mechanism, and we hope that this will be something that you will consider when you go back to your own country about ways to move forward with impact assessment for heritage sites and World Heritage Sites. Thank you.